There are bodies buried in Central Park. That's one of New York City's dirty little secrets, that a thriving Black community called Seneca Village was destroyed to make way for the park. But it's even worse than that. We're going to talk about it. Come, let's do our homework. In the early 1800s, this is what New York City mostly looked like, right? There was immigration, people coming from Europe, landing in New York Harbor, going through Ellis Island, and landing on the southern tip of Manhattan. So New York City was really only populated up until around 20th Street or so. And it was very, very crowded in this area. Chaotic tenement buildings were building up, people living on top of each other. The city was growing very, very quickly, and the residents of the city were looking for ways to get out of the noise and the hustle and bustle and the chaos that was Lower Manhattan, the Five Points, and New York City at the time. There were no green parks in this part of southern Manhattan. Everything was covered with mud and kind of dirty and dingy. So people would go to nature, the only place where they could find it, cemeteries. They would walk around cemeteries to get a breath of fresh air and a bit of greenery, have a picnic on the grounds, and just sort of relax in nature. So there was this general push for building a park in New York City, particularly among New York City's elite. They wanted to have something similar to what London had, which is Hyde Park, this sort of beautiful park with statues and fountains and a place to really show off. So the first suggested site of a grand park in New York City was along the East River. It was about 150 acres, and it spanned from 66th Street up to about 75th Street, from 3rd Avenue over to the East River. This was a place called Jones's Wood, and it was wooded. It was the countryside. You have to remember that New York City stopped at 23rd Street. So all of this space uptown was woods. It was the suburbs. Up here was people's country estates. You were out of the city, you were in the country. So in 1851, the New York State Assembly and the Senate both passed a resolution saying that they were going to take this area known as Jones's Woods through eminent domain and turn it into a park. But there was just one major problem. Two people lived here. There were two grand estates, two homes, right in this space. And these homes were owned by wealthy white families. They were the Schermerhorns and the Joneses. Both had these grand luxury estates overlooking the East River. They weren't their primary residences. These were second homes that these families would like to go to and get out of the city. And of course, they did not want to sell this undeveloped property, this open space, these woods to the city for a city project so other people could enjoy nature. They wanted to keep these wealthy estates themselves. So when the New York City Assembly came to them and said, hey, we're going to take this land from you by eminent domain and we're going to build a park here, of course, the Joneses and the Schermerhorns, these two families, sued New York State to block the park from being built on their land. So now the city is in court with these two families, back and forth. It's a big fight. So a different plan gets floated. Somebody says, hey, let's, instead of going over here to Jones's Woods and building our park, our little park on the East River, let's build a grand central park in the city. So this is the second idea for where to put a park. It's much, much bigger. It is 750 acres instead of 150 acres, and it's right in the middle of the island of Manhattan. Now remember, this is not the city yet. This is still the countryside. So this is all just sort of wooded area and just kind of open space. So now you have two different warring plans. There's the Jones Park plan and the Central Park plan. But Central Park, this whole location, was not uninhabited. It was home to a community called Seneca Village. And this was a thriving, middle class, mostly Black, but integrated community. It was about 2/3 African American and about 1/3 Irish American, recent Irish immigrants who had come to the United States to start a better life and found space for themselves in this community known as Seneca Village. Pictured right here. This is the map of what is currently Central Park, and this area right here was Seneca Village. The previous landowner of the space was a farmer named John Whitehead, and he had purchased this big lot of property back in 1824, and in 1825 he decided to start chopping it up into smaller lots and selling it to people. And he was a white man, but he was willing to sell property to Black families. So the first buyer of any of these plots of land was a young black man in 1825 named Andrew Williams, and he purchased 3 lots from John Whitehead for a total of $125. And on the same day, another black man, Epiphany Davis, who was a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, purchased 12 plots of land. They were both part of the New York African Society for Mutual Relief, which was an organization, a community of black people who sort of bonded together to help each other rise economically. Slavery had recently ended in New York City in the 1820s, and the only way you could vote in New York City if you were a black man was if you owned property. So there's this community of people who are helping each other purchase property in New York City. And they're well organized. As you can see, the little plots of land are divided up. They each have deeds. They have their purchases. They know who their neighbors are going to be. They are setting up a thriving community, a community that included 3 churches, a school, homes with gardens. They owned livestock. They went fishing in the Hudson River. They used the reservoir and the spring nearby for fresh water. They were farming. They had middle-class jobs. They were landowners. They lived with their Irish and German cousins peacefully. It was an integrated society. They were peaceful, they were rising, and they were prosperous. Come back for part 2 to find out what happened to Seneca Village.